And when you ask about the definition of failure, really, failure is when you try to do something, it doesn't work, and then you walk away. That is really failure. And I have failed more times than probably I'd like to admit, but what has kept me going, what has kept me from looking back on it with a sad or depressed perspective is that if I did try something, if I did fail, I try to learn as much as I possibly can from that experience. Ben, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure getting to know you in the past couple of conversations and now bringing our dialogue to the podcast. So my name, Jeffrey Fidelman, and my background, I'm sitting right now in Connecticut, US. I'm from the Northeast originally, graduated Harvard, spent the better part of a decade in banking between Morgan Stanley and HSBC. And then I worked with a family office, helping them deploy a venture capital fund as a partner. And our thesis there were tech and tech-enabled investments, early stage, where we would anchor those rounds and help syndicate the rest of the capital alongside the founder. In 2015, I left that business and opened up this investment bank, which I continue to run today. Fidelman&Co has about 30 people with it now, all remote, all US and Canadian based. And what we do is help early stage companies and fund managers both put together all of their fundraising materials, so preparing for a fundraise, as well as executing a fundraise. And the second piece of that is something that we have a relatively unique approach on, where we call it fundraise as a service, but it is effectively outsourced investment relations, where we have the infrastructure, where we have the people, and drop it into our clients' businesses on a month-to-month basis. And what that looks like is that we subscribe to all of the investor databases, the PitchBook, Preqin, Fintrix, ZoomInfo, and there's probably a few others that I'm leaving off there. We've aggregated it into our own internal database, and then layer an analyst on top of that who will reach out on behalf of the client. So Alex would call from ABC Company, or Alex is emailing from abc.com, so that from the investor's perspective, it's the company that's reaching out to them directly and not a third party. I'll pin it there. I don't want to monologue, but that's a little bit about who I am, what I do, and how I do what I do.
Well, it's important that you explain, because it's not everyday business. As far as I understand, there is a very interesting structure and purpose to your business.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So what's really interesting about conversation that's happened between us in previous conversations was that you highlight one thing that I found very interesting and fascinating for a number of reasons. So today we're going to take down the myth of the failure and what it really means. We're going to dissect what a failure really means. And the reason why I'm choosing to discuss this with Jeff, because he has a very interesting theory of the failure. So let's go.
Okay. And we were talking about this the other day. What makes things different here? I think that might have been the initial thread that you started pulling in our conversation, here being in the US, whether it's East Coast, West Coast, or what have you. And ultimately, what it came down to, I remember myself saying that failure is celebrated. And really what I mean by that is there is this environment here that I don't want to over-exaggerate in saying celebrating failure, but there's an environment here where it is okay to fail, that there are risks being taken, and that, quite frankly, it's almost more important to fail a few times before you're successful. Because the success in a first try is, I don't personally believe too much in luck, rather preparedness meeting opportunity. And I think it's fantastic when that does happen. But very rarely do I speak with entrepreneurs, or do we read about entrepreneurs that have made it to unicorn status and above, where their first idea was what got them to where they are. It's often through a series of failures that they can only achieve what they have achieved. And that is really entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship at the end of the day is, it's partly about knowing how to do things the right way. But I think a bigger part is having done them a wrong way and now knowing what things not to do.
Wow. There is so much right there. So we're celebrating the failure more than success, or at least it's on our mind. So I'm just going to bring in a simple idea of loss aversion, how we recognize the losses, how we validate losses more than opportunities to gain. So I want to open this discussion with you and ask you, what is that keeping us from failure? Or let's discuss what definition of the failure is.
I have a lot to say about that as well.
Oh, yeah.
But look, the point is that failing is hard, probably harder than succeeding. But failing the right way, right? It's not without qualifications that I say that. And to your point of loss aversion, we as humans or we as animals or mammals are constantly wired to think of risk management and risk mitigation. If I do X, what are all the possibilities or what are all the possible outcomes of my doing X? Whether it's starting a new business, whether it's going to college, whether it's going for a very comfortable job with longevity and tenure. And there's constantly this risk management that we go through. And I think that's more like Psych 101 on a day-to-day decision-making process of us going into the world, of us getting jobs, of us creating a business or creating a thought. And failing is incredibly hard because you first have to put yourself out there. Oftentimes, entrepreneurs are working against the grain or rolling the rock up the hill as opposed to letting it roll down and seeing this snowball effect. You have to get up the hill first. And that piece is what is incredibly difficult. And when you ask about the definition of failure, really, failure is when you try to do something, it doesn't work, and then you walk away. That is really failure. And I have failed more times than probably I'd like to admit, but what has kept me going, what has kept me from looking back on it with a sad or depressed perspective is that if I did try something, if I did fail, I try to learn as much as I possibly can from that experience. And if it was a goal that I am hell-bent on achieving, then I will continue to try different variations of maybe the same approach or a different approach to the same problem until I get it right. But only through failure can you actually go through those emotions and motions and processes and workflows to achieve that. And I'll kind of end this piece by also saying I'm a big fan of scientific method as it applies to business. And scientific method, we learned in primary or elementary school, is that you have a hypothesis, you create a control, a variable inside an experiment, and at the end of the experiment, there is a conclusion. And almost all the time, that conclusion just makes you rethink your hypothesis, create a new experiment, adjust the control and variable, and do it over and over again.
Yeah.
And I have a very similar approach to business.
Very cool. So there is something interesting that's happening in defining, I think, two things. So don't you think that actually failure, the way we frame the failure, the way we think about it is actually confusing coming from the language? That actually failure, if you replace the failure with word learning, that will be, oh yeah, of course, you have to learn how to be an entrepreneur. You have to learn how to manage a business. So it's not that I failed in my startup like 2 times. I learned how to run startup. I think that's the language that we use to communicate is also generated by loss aversion and the fear that always coming out of us that we're going to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that goes back to your point, Van, of this loss aversion. And what can we do to protect ourselves, to preserve ourselves constantly in the decisions that we're making? So I think that's why a lot of people think entrepreneurs are crazy. You have to be a little bit in order to go against the grain. And people are going to be looking at you and talking to you and constantly. And that's why a lot of entrepreneurs feel this element of loneliness as well, because whether it's psychological or whether it's just how they're built, there's a disconnect between somebody who chooses the path of loss aversion to someone who chooses the riskier path. I would be very curious, actually. I'll go back and take a listen to what you're referring to in terms of how he positions it. But I suppose my spin on that is not necessarily that I can't wait to fail, but it's along the lines of hope for the best and plan for the worst. You have to be prepared to fail. And again, failure, depending on how an individual defines it, is very different on its practical application to what we're talking about. I can't wait to fail may just mean I'm launching a product and I know it's going to get broken. And that's fundamentally what many serial entrepreneurs will repeat, and common denominator that I hear in speaking with them. I've seen it myself across literally every industry from tech to real estate development, that whatever it is that you or your management or even your team think that something needs to get built, it will most likely get used the wrong way by your
Yeah.
customers at some point. And it will get broken by something you couldn't even fathom that somebody would do. And it will break. And then you will need to come in and fix it. And you will need to anticipate certain things.
Yeah.
I have so many anecdotes about this and even about fundraising, like what we do. I'll never forget that one of our first clients, when we launched Fundraise as a Service, we're having our weekly call with them. And it was after maybe one or two investor introductions that they already had. And halfway through our check-in call, I asked him, did you ask for money? And it's a relatively benign question. They hired us to help put them in front of investors. They had a call with the investor. So I thought asking it was a little bit more of like an obvious question as opposed to anything else. And all of a sudden, we're on a Zoom call. His arms are in the air, red in the face, yelling at me why I didn't prep him to ask for money on the investor call. And, it's one of those things where I don't think he was right necessarily, but it did show me that I built something that was clearly there's a gap in the situation, or maybe I should have been more explicit about it. And now when we kick off with our clients, I will tell them directly to ask for money. Now, some of them laugh and say, Jeff, what are you talking about? Obviously, we're going to ask for money.
How can we dissect the failure? How can we take it into the pieces and really look into it? Or what can we learn from the failure? So the failures, the true failures, we don't really know. So the question here is, what do you consider as failure? How do you measure the failures, and how do you actually get them into your toolbox so that you can use the failure to really guide your clients forward?
I think that goes along the lines of even what I was just saying. I consider looking back on it, and maybe this is a bit self-deprecating, but I looked at that moment and thought to myself that I did not prepare this client enough, that they reacted the way that they did. And again, failure, learning from the failure, integrating it, this whole idea of scientific method, business in and of itself, yes, once you get to rinse and repeat, maybe that's your final conclusion and kind of submission. But until you get to that point, it really is trying new things over and over again, taking what worked, keeping it, taking what didn't work, and trying to figure that out, or trying to adjust that, or remove that, or alter it, or amend it in some sort of way where you can increase efficiencies. You can increase your deliverables to your customers, your clients, or whomever. And I believe that whether through iteration, whether it's because of failure iteration, or iteration and then failure and then reiteration, that's how businesses start to gain efficiencies, in my opinion. And those efficiencies come on this maybe bell curve or even reverse ramp implementation, where the first few times you run this scientific method, or you run changes or updates to your platform, to your workflow, you're likely to get the most benefit early on. So let's say you go through 5 different cycles of changes for increase of efficiency. The first time you do it, you gain 50% efficiency. The second time, 25. The third time, 15. The fourth time, 5. The fifth time, 2.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that it's no longer worth it, but it is important to break down, and again, whether it's business or even personal, to break it down into silos as opposed to generalizing like your entire life or your entire business, to break it into silos of achievable bite-sized abilities to gain these efficiencies. And then understand also that, yes, you should be obsessed with it, but to a certain degree. Because after a certain point, the amount of effort and time that you're putting in to gain additional efficiencies is just not worth it in that silo, in that specific workflow or function. And instead of using hypotheticals, exercise, right? At a certain point in time, you are maintaining where you want to be, or you're not really adding much more value to your workouts, to your business workflow and operations and automations. The first set of automations will probably give you an incredible amount of efficiency. But at the very end of all of these bits and pieces that you're putting together, the last automation is probably not going to put that much more efficiency into place, and maybe starts having a reverse effect where it's too many automations and not enough human touch, that you're losing efficiency. So I think that's the approach that at least I continue to take as well. And that, yes, scientific method, what I was saying before, but it's not endless. And you shouldn't think about it that way. There should be achievable goals that everyone has so that it is not so daunting.
Yeah. So it's not so abstract, and there is an element of hope, right?
Exactly.
Hope is a good thing, right? It's driving us forward. We are hopeful. creatures. There's emotion and there is a belief in things. But yeah, I do love your methodologies. There's a true scientific experimental, maybe even random experiments that you're describing here. I'm just curious to know what will come out of these. What will be opposite of failure? Let's talk about this for a second. What I'm really asking. If opposite of failure is not failing, is it success? I think that's just really blunt answer, right? Answering is like, oh yeah, that's success. Of course, you're not failing, you're succeeding. But isn't it failure part of success? So then it's not, right? Success is end.
That's the thing, right? Like salt and pepper, are they really opposites? And just because they're on the table next to each other doesn't make them opposites, doesn't make them contrast. If you oversalt something, putting a bunch of pepper into it isn't going to bring it back to neutrality, and vice versa. What is failing, or what is the opposite of failing? Failing is a conclusion. Failing is a point in time. Failing is an unrealized loss, right? If we're talking about stock market, you put your money into a stock and it goes down. Have you really lost money? Well, on paper, unrealized, yes, you have. But you only really lose money when you sell out of that stock and take the loss, or vice versa, hold it and wait for the gain, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, that's Schrodinger's cat, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. So when you talk about failure is a measurement in time, failure is a conclusion. Failure is something didn't work and I stopped trying. That is failure. So the opposite of failure is anything but that. The opposite of failure is not necessarily success, but it is progression. It is forward progress. That is the opposite of failure.
So what you're saying, if you don't play a lottery, you will never win it. That's for sure.
Exactly. But even more to that point, and we're talking about point in time, you play a lottery once and you don't win it. Don't expect to win it the second, third, fourth week without buying a ticket, to use your analogy.
So I think what we're actually talking about, because while you're talking, I was thinking about, there's quite a bit of the economy and structure, economy, statistic, if you will, that goes into this. If you elevate this to the point of what that really is, the success is a series of failures. If we remove the human aspect, which is irrational aspect, which we actually discussing all the time, what this conversation would be about? Would we actually have a conversation at all? Would failure be an option?
It's interesting that you bring this up. I recently spoke with a company that I think brilliant what they're working on, but also conflicted me. And I'll tell you what they do. It's essentially, it's an AI
Here we go.
kind of augmentation that gives you. So phase one of their company is essentially you put in your goal of what you're trying to achieve, but a job goal or a college goal, or I'm trying to get into Harvard, I'm trying to go work for Goldman Sachs, I'm trying to do XYZ. And this AI will effectively provide you with an analysis of where you stand, like a current resume or profile or what have you, identify and like the target person in the position you'd like to get into, and then help you bridge that gap. Meaning, Jeff, you need to go to a target school before you go into Goldman Sachs, or you need to do XYZ before you can apply to Goldman Sachs and be considered like a top candidate and have a high likelihood of success in achieving this goal that you've set out for yourself. And they're finite goals. It's not, I want to become a millionaire, right? Getting into a specific place, whether it's an educational institution or work opportunity or government or something like that. And which I thought was really cool. I totally understand it. That's technically a business that, career advisor or school advisor, those businesses exist today. It's just augmentation with AI, more data, more poignancy. The second phase, though, is where I became a little bit conflicted. And I've been thinking a lot about this ever since I spoke with this individual, is that their phase two is essentially almost like a placement. So instead of you putting your goal of where you want to be, you're early on, maybe in grade school, and there's a lot of AI tutors and educational systems now too, that measures you and then essentially directs you to where you would be most effective. And talk about a sci-fi movie, right? To me, this is conflicting because I start thinking through my mind, and we're coming now back full circle then about failure, about entrepreneurship, right? You think about Albert Einstein, he was horrible at math. Would this AI have told him, go be an artist? Would we have lost the theory of relativity and a number of other subsequent scientific innovations because of that? Now we're talking about failures. How many companies started out and not at all what they ended up being in order to get the unicorn status? How many times did they have to fail and reinvent themselves? How many times did people have to fail and reinvent themselves? right? You look at another such a cool pivot in terms of person in life is John Legend. John Legend used to be like either a McKinsey or BCG consultant, suit and tie, super buttoned up consultant. And now he went into music and he's an incredible musician and artist. But would AI have told him to go sit and be a consultant for the rest of your life and not allowed him to go into music or not ever given him that opportunity outside of him wanting to just go do his thing?
Yeah.
Going back to failure, going back to entrepreneurship, even now with that lens looking forward, I think that there's a lot more directionality that we already have seen from personalized advertising on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, on our cell phones to ultimately having even more direction. And there's this fine line, and that's why I was conflicted over how much should that be actually implemented and upheld, and how much us as humans, and one of our most unique qualities is innovation, is thinking outside of the box, is thinking in a way where it is outside of the norm.
Self-correcting.
Yeah.
I think that would be the word to use, self-directing, is how we make mistakes and we learn and we self-direct ourselves and move into different area. We pivot. It's interesting. We're talking about such a profound subjects here. So are you saying, let's just complicate this for a bit, that if we remove the human aspect, let's say that we remove the humans and that we just looking at the economical model only, that actually success would be highly predictable, that human irrationality and personalities and complexity of the human in this civilized world, civilization is what make this success being so complex. So we experiencing failures.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. Perhaps, let me take a step back. Success has a very relative definition from the perspective of the person where you or we or I am talking to. Success to some people is purely monetarily, to others it is intellectual, and to others it is nothing to do with any of those things, and they just want to be happy, live a stress-free life, have their family, and that's it. And success to everyone probably has a blend of all of those bits and pieces. And I think that being able to then predict success is incredibly difficult depending on where you're doing it. If you run a 5-year-old through this predictive success variability, how can you predict what success looks like, first of all, to them as an individual, and next, how they're actually going to achieve that? If success to an individual is defined by whether it's purely or partly by being married to the right individual, by having children or not having children for that matter, how do you predict that without then predicting the spouse's outcome and then actually putting those two people together at a certain point in time of their psychological growth?
Yeah.
Is it possible? Look, anything is possible, I suppose, but I personally can't imagine how that would work and how you actually are able to predict that. I mean, we are a collective of our past experiences and thoughts and consciousness. So to me, it's incredibly difficult to do something. Now, if you're just talking about economic success, then that is probably a little bit more likely, right? Because you're able to identify someone's strengths. You're probably able to then support those strengths and invest more in those specific strengths. And you have someone doing something better than most people can do that thing because they have already shown proclivity to it and there's been investment in it. We're not far from that today. When you look at educational institutions, primary schools in the US, there's AP classes, there's gifted programs, there's all of those bits and pieces where if a child is better at math than others or literature or English or physics or something else, there are opportunities for that child to enrich themselves more. And again, going back to the theme of our conversation, Van, I read something, I think yesterday or maybe 2 days ago, about how Yale courses, Harvard courses, Brown, all the Ivy League schools have published their courses online for free. And everyone before that was up in arms about this privatization of schooling and online educational institutions coming out. And if everybody could go to Harvard, we all would be in a better place or something along those lines from an education, like intellectual capital.
Yeah.
And guess what? All of those colleges have released free online courses. And we have the same number of people that are trying to absorb that material as were before. And the problem is not the availability of information. We are surrounded by information, both fact-checked and not. It is the people's availability and determination to actually go in and absorb that information. And that is what doesn't exist, which is fine. And that's just how we are as human race. And it shouldn't, 100% of the people won't do everything all at the same time, all like one another. But to say that there isn't availability of information, and if there was, more people would do it, they made it more available. And there are not more people absorbing it. Not because it's not available, because the people do not have the willingness and the commitment to actually, and the dedication to do it.
Yeah. So it is interesting how we're getting back to the beginning of this, and the question that I have is: a failure real? It seems to me it's highly philosophical and psychological. So is it real, right? Or it's just we know it's part of success, but is that anything like that? Or are we going back to the language that we just blew up and painted red the word failure, so because it's so scary for us? I'm just questioning, is that it actually is a failure? It's real? Is it imagined concept that somebody named, so now we are using it? Or would this word probably going to be better if we don't have that word in our language to describe or pair it with the success? It's just kind of statement. And yeah, let's comment on that if you want.
I was reminded recently that without sadness, there cannot be happiness. If you live a monotonous life, then if you never really get happy about anything, how can you really get sad about anything? Or vice versa, right? If you're not capable of experiencing or being exposed to those types of emotions.
There's no stars without the darkness.
Exactly. I would take that and I would extend it to what we're talking about. Can there really be success without failure?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that's possible, because if everyone is successful at everything, then what defines success? So there needs to be failure in order for there to be success, both from a bandwidth and volume of human perspective, but also from the perspective of innovation, of building on top of one another. We as a human race, that is the beauty of what we do and what we can do, and what makes us different as Homo sapiens, as humans, rather than many of the mammals and animals out there, that we're able to build upon collective knowledge and move it forward. We don't have to reinvent fire every generation. We don't have to reinvent the wheel every generation. We don't have to reinvent how we build, how we think, how we collectively act every generation. We're able to take the failings from past generations and improve upon them in future. Or maybe I'm being idealist right now, but yeah, in an ideal scenario, we improve upon the failings of our past generations.
Yeah. I think failure has a lot to do with the memory and how we remember it. Do we remember it as there's nothing like a positive failure, or there is positive failure? How are we painting it in red or painting it into yellow? Or can we see it differently than it really is? Does a failure always mean the same thing to everybody and at all the time? So yeah, just to segue a little bit, the purpose of the memory is actually really to teach us how not to fail, or to teach us how to succeed based on the failures. So it's the way we interpret the failures. It's easy for Steve Jobs and guys from Airbnb talk about failures and talk about passion and all that now after so many years, right? But when you go through that moment, it's really not fun.
Oh no, it's hard to fail. Like I said, it's one of the hardest things to do, to put yourself out there, to do something no one else is doing, and to fail, because you will fail. And that's okay. I think that's part of the process, as I mentioned before, but it's incredibly hard.
Yeah. I have a last question that I'm asking everybody on the podcast, because the name of the podcast is New Changes Everything. It's a little bit of philosophical, but has a really deep, profound psychological background, like how we don't like changes and we love new things, right? We hate changes and we love new things. So what that would be in your life, in your career, new, that changes everything? For
me, there's a lot. And as you can hear through my own philosophy, how I think about both business, personal, and else. I guess one of the biggest changes, and I still consider it in recent memory, was having kids. and talk about new life, new situation, new circumstance, new priorities, new everything. And I think that was probably the biggest change in my life, where I spoke about this recently with somebody, that in the blink of an eye, in the snap of a fingers, when I had my first child, my entire list of life priorities of what I found to be important had changed, had reorganized rather. I don't want to say changed. And things that I found to be really important, things that I would obsess over prior to that, had fallen to the very bottom, if not off the list entirely. And the prioritization of certain aspects and certain things, not necessarily work, but how I thought about work and longevity and my own time commitment and time, spending out of the office, at home with my kids, has really changed a lot of kind of workflow and how I think about business. So philosophically, that has definitely been one of the biggest changes, with something new that has come in, new being a child. And this is now, I'm still talking about it the way that I am, and this is over 5 years ago. Thank you. We're launching something new now as a company as well, where, as I mentioned before, and what we did, we aggregated this database and then layer an analyst on top of it. So we're trying to figure out a way now, and we're working on how to productize that database and launch that. And that has been a very new experience, because I have always worked in and around tech, but not as a tech company. And I keep making the joke that despite we're building this essentially CRM database software, I'm refusing to turn this into a software company.
Yeah.
That will be my cornerstone. And that's been a lot of new as well, because I've had to roll up my sleeves. I've had to learn a lot about engineering and workflow and databases and structures of systems and structures of data. It's something I love doing. It's something I know I have to do in order to actually have something launched at the firm. So it's been really new. It's been taking up a lot of my time, but not without cause, I would put it that way.
So what you're saying is learning new things, there's the two things you're saying: having a kids, which is very new, changes your life. And the second one is learning many new things, is the one that changes everything.
And that's why I love what I do too. I get a chance to speak with new companies, new ideas, 10 times a day, every single day.
Wow.
And I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.
Wow. So basically what you're saying, new is a happiness for you.
Oh yeah, I love it. Maybe my brain just works that way and I'm capable of taking it on, but I absolutely love it.
Very cool. I agree with you. New makes me happy, nothing else. I totally agree with you. This philosophical.
And by the way, Van, to now come full circle, what you asked me before, can there really be anything new without something getting old?
Oh.
How do you define new? Is new a day old, a week old, a year old, 5 years old? What is new? And at what point does new stop being new?
I don't necessarily think about new being old and old being new again. I'm thinking about comparing these things. I compare new with change. When new became change, and when change became new, that was an interesting framework to me. And when new became old, I think there's a time framework around that. How we experience something, and it's called adjustment bias. When you buy a new car to yourself, right? You drive it for a few weeks, and then it's like you're not even noticing that you drive a new car, right? Then you don't. I don't know. It is interesting mind frame to have when new became old. Is it really important that new became old, or we keep reinventing new, or what is the new really? New makes you happy, and that is really amazing. I can't agree more to that. So thank you so much, Jeffrey, for being guests. That was a rich and complex conversation. I love that. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Van. I really enjoyed it. I'm glad you and I connected, and I'm really just glad we've been having the conversations we've had. It's been super stimulating, and happy to continue the conversation as well.
Thanks so much.
All right, Van. I'll talk to you soon.